Welcome in to This Week in Bitcoin, a special episode. I'm on the road. My name is Chris LAS.com, JupiterBroadcasting.com. Well, before I left, I had a chance to sit down with someone who's proven them wrong every single day. All the haters out there that say nobody uses Bitcoin for anything but hodling, you can't use it for any day-to-day transactions. Well, this individual is proving them wrong every single day. Oscar Merry is building the Fountain.fm podcast app, one of the favorites in the Bitcoin community. But did you know Oscar was a Bitcoiner long before he became a podcast app developer? I wanted to start, just for the audience's sake, with Bitcoin. I think that's where we should start. And if I recall, you were a Bitcoiner long before you started working on the Fountain podcasting app, which obviously integrates Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's right. I feel very fortunate that I discovered Bitcoin relatively early, quite accidentally. Didn't understand it for many, many years. But a friend of mine way back in the day, who I saw as someone, very intelligent, was just like telling me all about it. And I was just like, okay, cool. I'll, just listen to you. And then, the kind of readers.
Were you skeptical?
No, honestly, I was very young at the time, and I just didn't even look into it at all. But he just told me, this is going to be massive in the future. You should buy some. And so I just bought some and forgot about it for years after that. And then maybe in like 2016, 2017, kind of learned about in a bit more detail, became more interested in economics and things like that, and read the book, The Bitcoin Standard, which I think was transformative for a lot of people. And that was when I kind of, realized, oh, wait, I have some of this. Let me go check on it. It wasn't like a crazy amount. It wasn't like life-changing or anything like that, but it was enough to make me, pay attention at that time. And obviously the price going up, but I think reading the Bitcoin Standard in maybe 2016, 2017 was when it clicked for me. And also, as for many people as well, seeing just the problems that Bitcoin solves in your everyday life, inflation, I live in London and the prices of everything are just skyrocketing. And eventually you do have to ask yourself the question, why are the prices for things double what they were when I was a child? And so it was kind of the combination of those two things. But yeah, started learning about Bitcoin properly in maybe 2016, 2017, but never thought I would end up working with the technology as we do now today with Fountain.
Wow, no kidding. And so I'm sure now know quite a bit about the Lightning Network. Did you get into Lightning at all before Fountain, or was it in building Fountain that you needed to learn the Lightning Network?
Yeah, so it was actually very accidental that all of this happened, and we started working on Fountain in the sense of what it is today. So the kind of backstory is I've always been really passionate and interested in audio as a medium. I think it's such an amazing medium for learning because, number one, if you compare it to something like text, you just get so much more depth because you get the speaker's voice, you get the intimacy, you get the tone of what they're saying. And I've always believed that audio is a great medium for transmitting, knowledge, information, and wisdom. I also think that it's great just because it's such a simple reason, but you can listen when you're on the go, when you're doing chores. Again, I'm in London, so I spent a lot of my life sitting on buses for hours going into and back from the office. So yeah, always been interested in audio. Before Fountain, I had a previous business that was also working in the audio space with voice assistants, things like Amazon Alexa and Google Assistant. So did a lot with audio during that work. And yeah, I had a previous business. We ended up selling that business. And so I had a bit of time in between things to kind of decide what I wanted to do next. And I've always been a developer, so I always wanted to build a mobile app. So the first version of Fountain was just a side project that I decided to build around, the idea of sharing short form audio content with people that you know. And eventually that led to me realizing, what's the best source for short form audio content? It's podcasts, because that's where all the audio content is. And then it just so happened, so we had this app, and then Nick, who is a friend of mine, we've known each other for a long time, we were kind of like discussing this and working on it together, but just, as a side project. And then, so I was looking around for a podcast API, and that's when I came across Adam and Dave and Podcasting 2.0, literally about a month, I think, after they'd first launched the show and also introduced the value block into the RSS feed. So that was when it kind of clicked for me straight away. I'd been primed on Bitcoin. I was a massive believer in Bitcoin for many years before that. I was very interested in audio and podcasting and how we can make podcasts more discoverable and how we can share the insights that exist within episodes in a way that you don't have to necessarily follow the feed to see that. And then all of a sudden I hear Adam, the Podfather, and Dave talking about how they're integrating the Lightning Network into podcasting. And it just kind of clicked that this was a cool new opportunity within podcasting that leverages this programmable money that we now have with the Lightning Network. And so that was when we decided, okay, let's double down on this. Let's, really lean into payments via the Lightning Network within the podcasting app. And we launched Fountain in like a very, very bad state, but that was how it all got started.
The timing it's really amazing, right? Because the Lightning Network early on wasn't very usable, but by the time Dave and Adam got serious about using it, it had gotten to a pretty good place. And so the timing that you have with the namespace they put out there and the value block and the podcast index API combined with Lightning getting to a usable state it all really kind of came together. But what you ended up doing amongst the other Podcasting 2.0 developers is created another viable demonstration of how Bitcoin can be used in day-to-day microtransactions. And one of the most common criticisms of Bitcoin is that, well, you can't actually spend it on anything. You can't actually send it anywhere, and nobody actually uses it for anything. But it kind of proved the opposite. And now there's a demonstrable microtransaction frequent use here, and it's in podcasting, and it's in with music and other things.
Yeah, exactly. And I think podcasting is just such a great example of an industry and a technology that requires something like Lightning because it's fragmented. You couldn't have interoperable payments and interoperable metadata, which I know we'll get onto in a bit. You couldn't have that with the fiat payment system because it's all closed off behind, company APIs. There's no way to share that data publicly. And so it just makes so much sense for podcasting.
Yeah, it's so great when, I'm doing a podcast and people, I'll play a clip of somebody saying you can't use it for transactions. Meanwhile, people are literally streaming sats while they listen to the clip. It's pretty hilarious. So, okay, so that brings us to Fountain. And is it overambitious to say that what you're trying to build here is sort of an open alternative to YouTube or Spotify, something that's on top of standards and open payments and RSS feeds?
Yeah, I mean, we want to be very ambitious with Fountain, and I think there's just huge opportunity to create a listening experience that delivers from, the UX and design standards of something like Spotify, but introduces open payments and open discovery so that you can, get more from the listening experience. And also just interact with the people you follow normally. The biggest example I like to think of what we're trying to fix is if you imagine a social media site like Twitter or X. Historically, I've used Twitter a lot. I find it incredibly valuable. I've learned a lot there. I've made great connections on there. Generally, it's been an amazing experience. But I'm also a huge podcast fan. And, listening to podcasts, talking about my favorite podcasts is something that I love doing. But on a social media site like Twitter or X, there is podcast conversation that goes on there, but it's hidden in this kind of massive mess of, politics, rage bait, shocking videos, like all of this stuff that kind of naturally bubbles to the top of an attention-based algorithm. And I'm unable to find the, smaller niche conversations about podcasts that I love. Even though I follow all of the podcast hosts on Twitter, that content just doesn't seem to do well in the kind of global attention algorithm that powers what I see in the feed. And that's why I think that if we can use these open technologies, Lightning for payments, Nostr for social, to give people flexibility in how they use social media and allow them to kind of, selectively hide the things that they don't want to see and only see the things that are relevant to them in what they're doing at that moment. Like if I open my podcast app or if I open social media on a Saturday morning and what I really want to do is find a good long episode to listen to while I'm having a walk and having a coffee, I don't want to see, the latest rage bait political tweet. I just don't want to see that. I want to see interesting, thoughtful shares about podcast episodes that maybe I don't see in my library because I don't follow the feed. I just want to see the people that I respect, the people that I follow, what they've been listening to, what they've been finding interesting. And that also applies to the time frequency of these feeds as well. If you open something like Twitter, you're generally only going to see content from the last, 24 hours, maybe 48 hours. But, I may have missed something. I may have missed a share about an episode that happened 2 weeks ago because I don't want to open Twitter every day. And that's another aspect to how if you create an open social graph, you can have full flexibility on what you see there. So yeah, to answer your question directly, we would love to, have the scale of something like Spotify, but we want to do it in an open way whereby the social data that we are using within Fountain is not locked into Fountain. People can slice and dice it however they want to, build their own experiences with their own, sets of algorithms and trending sections based on whatever they want. I just think there's so much opportunity to preserve what we all love about podcasting, which is long form content, niche content that just goes so deep on a particular topic that is maybe not it maybe doesn't have mainstream appeal, but bring the discovery features of social media and apply it to that in a way where users have control. Like the discovery on social media is good. Like there's no denying it. It surfaces content that you wouldn't have otherwise seen based on your existing interests, your existing follower graph. Like that's great. The problem is that there's just one global algorithm and there's no way for Twitter to know whether I am in the mood for a podcast episode or in the mood for, some political rage bait. It just doesn't know how I'm feeling. But
yeah, and as a podcaster, I would say it biases video considerably, right? It's not surfacing podcasts.
Exactly. It's biasing video. So, is the Twitter algorithm going to show you, a really insightful recommendation for an episode that's audio only and has a link to link out of Twitter? Or is it going to show you a native Twitter video with, some political commentary? And I keep using the politics example as a contrast. Like I do like political content sometimes, but
you're describing my exact use case. Saturday morning, I got some choring to do, and I often fire up the Fountain app and I take a quick look at the feed just to see if I can find something that released earlier in the week that's long form content, because I'm going to be working for an hour or two and I don't want to switch every 15 minutes. And I just want something that isn't going to upset me. I just want something that's going to be a pleasant listen while I do some chores. So you're describing my exact Saturday morning. And it seems to me like this is the true reason why you have put so much effort into integrating Nostr. And I know there's probably people listening like, I don't want to use Nostr. But this is where that open graph comes from, right? This is where that gives you the ability to collect this information without having to create some sort of proprietary Fountain algorithm or proprietary Fountain data set.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's another example of great timing. So for anyone who's listening who's used Fountain for a few years now, you'll probably remember the social features that we had pre-Nostr. And it was all, just locked into the Fountain app. We had our own profiles, we had our own follower graph, we had our own commenting system that only really worked within the Fountain app. And for years, we were trying to figure out, okay, how do we, create comments sent from other apps? How do we publish our own comments so that other apps can ingest them? The dream of cross-app comments. We spent many years thinking about this. And eventually when Nostr first kind of came on the scene, I did think to myself, this is it. This is the answer. But initially we were like, okay, is Nostr going to grow? Does it have, is it going to work? Are there going to be other clients that are going to start generating data that we can ingest? And as Nostr has grown, it's still very small. I think we came to the realization about a year and a half ago that it was going to work for us. Then the question was, okay, how do we reliably reference podcasts? How do we kind of join OpenRSS and Nostr in a way that's reliable? And so I came up with this NIP called NIP73, which is the external content IDs NIP. And that took a long time to, go back and forth with the Nostr community and figure out the right way to do it. But now we have this NIP. What it essentially does is allows us to reference podcast GUIDs at the show level, but also item GUIDs at the episode level. And with those two sets of tags, which are designed in a way that they're Nostr native and can be queried by any of the default relay software that's out there, it means that now we have a way to tag either a show or an episode in any Nostr event. That could be, a kind one post like the ones we use in Fountain. That could be live chat message for live streams. That could be, a long form article, or it could be anything new that comes down the line. So once we had those two pieces in place, a bit of traction with Nostr generally and a bit of stability in some of the, main Nostr clients like Primal and Damus and Amethyst, plus the NIP73 external content IDs, that kind of enabled us to rebuild all of the social features within Fountain to use Nostr. And yeah, we launched the Nostr integration last year, and we just relaunched the Nostr integration a couple of weeks ago with our 1.3 release, where we've introduced a bunch of new cool things. We've also rebuilt the entire infrastructure for serving the Nostr data, so everything's a lot more fast and snappy. But yeah, Nostr's perfect for what we want to do in terms of creating a social experience around podcasts that, only really applies to podcasts. And yeah, at one point we were thinking, okay, should we use the Twitter API? But, that's going to cost us like a crazy amount of money and could be shut down at any time. So I think Nostr really is, it may not succeed, but I think it has an incredible chance to become the social layer of the internet that any developer can build on, and you can use the data from anywhere to power any different app. And yeah, I'm trying to push the Podcasting 2.0 community towards Nostr just because I think it ticks all of the boxes on what we've been looking for. And yeah, excited to have more. I know there's a lot of people working on new podcast listening experiences that use Nostr as well. So excited to see those come out.
I could definitely see Nostr helping the Podcasting 2.0 project maintain or achieve greater decentralization too. So I think that's a lens in which perhaps they should consider it. I've been seeing more engagement on Nostr in the last 3 months than I think I have in the last year. So there is something to it. And I do contribute some of that to Fountain, because if somebody ties their Fountain profile to a Nostr identity and then they boost the show, well, then I can easily follow them on Nostr. And so I'm building out my Nostr social network just by following folks that follow the show, and they follow me. And so there is a bit of a network effect happening there. And I got to say, the 1.3 release, new home tab's great, and search is great. The Nostr stuff just feels super smooth now. I didn't realize you'd rebuilt the infrastructure for it. So it really does feel like this is the version you could tell people, go out and try this now. It's come a long ways. Let's talk about the transition happening in the background around boosts. So today, most boosts are done using our old friend Keysend, which doesn't really have much adoption in the wider Lightning ecosystem. Could you just give us like a TLDR on the history around Keysend and why it's maybe not the future of boosting and how we need to transition to something, but we're not quite there yet?
Yeah, happy to give like a brief kind of history of the two different protocols within Lightning, and also like where we're at now and why I think this transition makes sense. So the key difference between Bolt 11, which is what is used under the hood of Lightning Address, and KeySend, is that Bolt 11 requires an invoice. So in order to send a payment to someone over the Lightning Network, you need to first request an invoice, and then you can pay that invoice. And when it comes to metadata, there's only a small field that you can add to when you're paying that invoice. It's the comment field, and I think it's limited to something like 200 characters, which is why it's not as expressive in terms of what KeySend provides with the TLV records. KeySend, on the other hand, is kind of like a push payment that doesn't require as much interactivity. You can essentially just push money to any destination if you have that destination's node pub key. So for the kinds of things that Podcasting 2.0 has been doing in terms of, the craziness of streaming money every minute, and sometimes to large sets of splits. I've seen splits up to like 20 different splits. So you're talking about 20 individual payments every minute. The amount of interactivity matters. And so KeySend at the beginning looked very promising. And because of that kind of lower interactivity, KeySend also has the ability to attach quite a large amount of metadata in what's called the TLV records. So at the beginning of Podcasting 2.0, if you were to choose between Bolt 11 invoices, which is the kind of standard way of doing payments on Lightning, and KeySend would have made a lot more sense. And I can see why, Adam and Dave initially adopted that, and we used it for years, and it worked really well. The issue with KeySend is the lack of adoption in other wallets and the confusion that brings to people coming into the world of Bitcoin, coming into the world of Podcasting 2.0. Because you have to remember that with Lightning, there is slow adoption, and this adoption happens in different ways in different countries around the world, in different regions. Very few Lightning wallets today support the KeySend protocol, and trying to onboard people to Bitcoin and to Lightning to a wallet with KeySend is very difficult. There's just so few options. The other issue with KeySend is a UX issue. So, the Lightning address is an amazing construct that I think will be the equivalent of an email address in the future. It makes sense to everybody. If you've never heard of Bitcoin before, if you don't know what the Lightning Network is, if I explain to you that, hey, this Lightning address is like an email address for money, all you have to do is give your Lightning address to somebody and they can pay you. That makes sense to anybody. It's really clear. It's easy to understand. It's side by side with email as something that people can just understand immediately. Lightning address is built on top of Bolt 11. And so one of the issues we were seeing with KeySend is people saying, I have a Lightning address. Why can I not get paid in Podcasting 2.0? I have a Lightning address. I've got my Strike wallet. I've got my Cash App wallet. Why can I not participate in Podcasting 2.0? And then we'd have to get into the conversation of, there's actually two protocols within Lightning. There's KeySend and there's LNURL Bolt 11 Lightning address, and they're not quite the same thing, and you need to make sure. And that's where you lose people in terms of the onboarding. I believe Lightning will be the kind of future of the payments layer on the internet. And the way that it's going to get there is through easy UX. The easy UX is the Lightning address. It just makes so much sense. So yeah, it's the combination of lack of support from wallets and the kind of product market fit, easy UX of the Lightning address that for me is the kind of core reasons why Podcasting 2.0 community wants to move from KeySend to Lightning address. I think that, obviously I've been a big advocate for making this change, but I think if you speak to any of the podcasters that are involved with, onboarding their audience who are maybe not that technical and are brand new to Bitcoin, Or if you speak to app developers that are trying to understand, how do I attach a wallet to my podcast app? How do I, go through the process of doing that? I think everyone does agree that Bolt 11 and Lightning Address is the way forward. It's obviously just a big change within podcasting 2.0. And the big outstanding issue is the metadata and how we solve that. But I'm convinced that it's the right move. And the more we can just simplify this for everybody, the more chance we have of wider adoption of Bitcoin and Lightning.
It's easier on the podcasters too, right? Because the way it works now is, in order for a listener to send me a boost, I put my node address in the value block in our RSS feed. Well, a node address it's a pretty long thing, and sometimes you have multiple users on a single node, so then there's a little extra steps you have to take there, and it's not clean, and it's also not easy to update. Like, I have changed out nodes, and I don't know, 6 months later, somebody's got an old cache of the feed, and they're sending sats to an old node address, where if I could just keep the entry in the RSS feed as like an email address, as an LN URL, then on the back end, I change what that LN URL points to. So I think it's got advantages there. It's easier for co-hosts, all that stuff. But you mentioned metadata, and I want to just define a little bit. So the metadata includes things like what episode you're listening to, what show you're listening to, your podcast client, and your handle that you've chosen. And also, the other thing that's actually quite valuable is the total amount of the boost that you're sending. So maybe I only get a 5% split, but I know the total amount. So when I go to give the listener credit on air, I credit them for the total amount, not just the 5% split that went to my node, because that's also in this. So there's some pretty valuable information in that metadata, which has not yet been really solved, at least universally, for the LN URL approach. So I'm curious what your current thoughts are around that challenge.
Yeah, so you're definitely right. That metadata is so valuable, and if we're to agree on a system going forward, it has to include a provision for sending that metadata. I think the first thing to say is that I think there are many options here. It's just a question of everybody coming together and choosing an option, which is always difficult, right? It's always difficult when you're working in, an open specification with multiple different apps and hosting companies and, players. For everybody to agree is a difficult thing. But I think that it's possible, and there's some really good options out there. I would also point out that the KeySend metadata did have some flaws. One example being what you just mentioned around the total if you're only receiving a split. So if you're only receiving a 5% split, there's just a number that gets inserted into that split payment, which tells you what the total was. But that is totally spoofable. Someone could just put in whatever they want there. It's not an ideal way of you kind of validating what the total is and what the other splits were. The other thing is failed payments as well. That like valued MSAT total field in the TLV doesn't tell you if one of the split payments failed to one of the other recipients in the episode. So there are issues with the current metadata system, but I think more importantly, it's more about the move to Lightning Address. I can share like some ideas on what I think the path forward is, if that's useful.
Yeah, I'd be curious. Because I think it's a tough spot, and there does need to be, leadership isn't quite the right word, but there needs to be momentum in here for consensus to be achieved, right? Because it's a loose group of independent folks organized around a project, and so there's not really momentum yet. So I'd be curious to know what you're thinking.
Yeah, okay. I'll share my ideas. So I think, you've already heard me talk about Nostr and why I love it and why I think it can really help open podcasting kind of not only match the big centralized apps like Spotify, but actually build even better experiences. So the first idea for sharing metadata via LN address does use Nostr. Before I share the details, I also want to say that Nostr is seeing really good adoption, and many, many people are having their first experience, their first touch point with Lightning on Nostr. And they'll download a Nostr client like Primal, they'll set up a wallet, and they'll start receiving zaps for their regular posts on social media or Nostr social media. And So Nostr clients are onboarding people to Lightning. They're giving them a Lightning address, and they're also giving them, a profile. And I do think that Nostr is going to be part of the Lightning story, and it's going to drive the standards in Lightning going forward. And so I think the more that Podcasting 2.0 can align with that, the better, because we're still a very small group and we're still yet to see, a mainstream adoption of Lightning within, for example, the existing hosting companies. Yes, some of the hosting companies have added, free form fields to, add your key send information, but there's not really been too much more than that. Whereas on the Nostr side, there's a lot more kind of like deep integrations with Lightning and with wallets. So, and I also think that going forward, the way that we are going to navigate the internet, we're going to have two things that we need to navigate the internet. The first is our Lightning address so that we can get paid anywhere, and our Lightning wallet so that we can pay people anywhere on the internet. And the second is going to be our npub so that we can interact as us on any website and bring our follower graph and our interest graph to those websites. So yeah, with that said, the first idea is just to reuse what is already there, which is the Nostr Zap spec. So the way Zaps work on Nostr is the person sending the payment signs a Nostr event, which is the Zap request. And this is the proof that the person sending the payment has initiated the payment. And then the receiving wallet signs a Zap receipt, which includes the Zap request inside of it, and publishes that if and only if the payment succeeds. So this is the way Zaps work on Nostr. And the Zap spec, combined with what I talked about earlier in terms of those podcast GUID tags in Nostr event, has everything we need to publish all of the data that was previously in the KeySend TLV. The great thing about this as well is Lightning wallets already know how to publish Zap receipts. So if you're using Alby wallets know how to publish Zap receipts because Alby are big supporters and believers in Nostr. If you're using Strike, the Strike wallet knows how to publish Zap receipts as well. So we don't need to convince the receiving wallets to support Nostr and support Nostr Zap receipts. They already do. And more, supporting Nostr and things like Nostr Wallet Connect are becoming, the kind of headline features for Lightning wallets. And so I think we'll see more and more these Nostr Zap receipts publishing being supported. So really, if you think about it, if you had a episode and you had 3 splits in the episode, you had a Fountain wallet as one of the splits, you had an Alby Lightning address as the next split, and then you had a Strike wallet as the third split. All 3 of those wallets support Nostr Zap receipts. And so for a podcast app to, share the metadata about the boost, all they have to do is sign a Zap request and attach it when they're paying the Bolt 11 Lightning address payment. So an app like Podcast Guru, for example, which already supports paying Lightning addresses through their Strike integration, they already know how to pay Bolt 11 invoices. The only difference when sending a Zap is just this signing of a Zap request and inserting that into the URL when you're requesting the invoice. It's actually very simple to do. You construct some JSON, which every developer knows how to do, and then you sign it using some cryptographic primitives that are available on every platform. There's libraries to do it. And what's cool about this is you can put any tags in the Nostr Zap request. So you can put, obviously, the episode and show GUIDs, which allow you to, properly assign the Zap to an episode or a show. But you can also put other things in there. You can put the message, you could put the timestamp of the episode, you could put anything you want, really. And then when it comes to the value MSAT total for calculating the total of all splits, you could put that in the Nostr Zap request, but also there's actually a better way to do it, which is just to query the Nostr network for all of the Zap receipts, because then you can take into account failed payments and things like that. So yeah, option one for how I think we should move forward is just reusing what's already there, what already has adoption on every single Nostr client, which is the Zap spec.
Right.
It doesn't change anything for podcasting 2.0. Interactions, we don't have to call them Zaps, we can still call them boosts. It's just the way that podcasting 2.0 apps and hosting companies will pass around this data is on the Nostr network.
Yeah. The lift there is on the developer side, I suppose. The upside would be is then, assuming you had broad adoption, if people that were creating these apps wanted, they'd have a rich set of discovery data that they could integrate into their apps.
Exactly, yeah. Like we, as Fountain, we would love to see, all of the boosts happening on all of the different podcasting 2.0 apps and put them on our episode pages, display them in our feeds. We would love to do that. And also, our payment information is already out there. We publish it on Nostr via the Zap spec today. So if any app developer wants to query the Fountain relay for Zaps for a specific episode, you can do that today. It's really easy. It's a very small query just based on the show GUID and the episode GUID. So it also, doing it this way doesn't just solve the problem of how do we send the metadata. It also solves the problem of how do we have the metadata available for anybody that wants to query it and use it in an interesting way, which with the KeySend TLV, that didn't exist. There's no way for me to kind of, connect into someone's helipad and pull out all of the payment data so that I can include
I was just thinking, like, you could see somebody out there build a helipad as a service that pulls this from Nostr for podcasters, because I don't know how other podcasters collect their boosts and read them on air. Like, we've had to build a series of tools to collect them and mark them up and format them. Like, somebody could build that as a service if that information was publicly available.
Yeah, exactly. And I've always thought, like, the service that's going to build the best, charts within podcasting shouldn't be one of the apps or hosting companies. It should be, someone who collates that data from everywhere. And if we have a metadata system for payments and social data like comments that is truly open and anyone can query, then it allows those like third-party services to spin up and provide value in different ways. And that's how we can get to the point where we're really competing with apps like Spotify, because, Fountain, we're a tiny team, we don't have the resources to do everything. But if we can make all of the data open, then we don't have to, everybody can kind of pick the thing that they're most interested in, whether that's analytics, whether that's, social, whether that's onboarding, whether that's payments, and just contribute their little piece.
That's a great point. And it adds just another, yes, we have something that's super chat competitive. We have a live competitive. I think you and I are pretty much in consensus here. The challenge seems to be, it is a lift for these app developers, and some of them have already gone down the path of ActivityPub. Other folks are sort of committed to doing as little as possible on the client side and not having server infrastructure. So that seems to be maybe where the biggest friction is, just the lift by the developers, don't you think?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that, to be honest, I think you were right when you said it requires some momentum. And I think, from my perspective, originally, I think it was December of last year, which is when I went on Podcasting 2.0, and we talked through, the switch to LN address and why it was important. And, generally there was consensus then that, yes, we want to do this. It's going to be difficult. It's going to take time. I think, to be honest, like, we've just been so busy with Fountain 1.3 launch, getting the Fountain app to a place, as you say, where we can share it and showcase a great experience, that we haven't put that much time into it in terms of showcasing how easy it can be. So I think, now that we've got 1.3 out of the way, we can kind of do more in terms of showcasing actually how easy it is. If you're already paying a Bolt 11 invoice, like Podcast Guru, for example, to attach a signed JSON payload to that payment request is very easy. It doesn't take much time. And also, the important thing to note is that, you don't have to use Noster's social features to use the data transport features of Noster. You don't have to add profiles to your app. You don't have to add comments. You don't have to do any of that. You can just use the Noster network for transmitting the payment metadata.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, because I think that is something people kind of connect as, oh, now I have to have a Nostr profile. And it's right. It's in a way, it's this unbelievable gift of this decentralized relay network that moves notes around. And you could just think of it as that, really. And that's where I'm really surprised that the developers of these different apps haven't leaned more into it when you think of it that way. But so speaking of momentum, is the thought to try to come up with a workable system that Fountain can show as sort of like here's an example?
Yeah, that's the goal, is to just have some sample code that shows, okay, side by side, here's what you were inserting to the KeySend TLV before, and here's how you can just recreate that exact thing, attach it to the Lightning address Bolt 11 payment, and publish it to a relay. And literally, here's the code. Here's the JavaScript code if you're using React Native. Here's the Swift code if you're using iOS, and just showcase that code, because I think that it can be intimidating, especially when you think about cryptographic signing and key pairs and stuff like that. But the libraries exist. It's very easy. You don't have to have a profile. You don't even have to have, the ability like Fountain has, where you can import your Nostr profile. You could just create a key pair that lives in the podcast app and it never goes anywhere, and it's just purely for sending metadata. So yeah, that's definitely the plan, to get some sample code out here and hopefully just find one other app that is willing to do this. I mean, Wavelake for music already does this. They use the same spec. All of the payments that happen in the Wavelake mobile app get broadcast onto Nostr. So as a developer, if you were to go and query either the Fountain relay or the Wavelake relay today, you would be able to pull all of the boosts for all of the music, whether it's hosted on Wavelake or self-hosted or anywhere else, and you'd be able to load all of the boosts for a particular track or a particular artist or a particular album. So it is working. It's just, it just requires that final push and that big change. But I'm hopeful. I think we're getting there. I think I've spoken to some of the other Podcasting 2.0 app developers that they're looking into this. They're working on it, identifying different choices. But I think, one big final kind of pitch from me on the Nostr side would maybe be helpful. So hopefully I'll send this episode around. Maybe we can see what progress we'll make.
I hope so. I am keen to see that transition work out. A lot of for the reasons you articulated around just the ease of use of LN URL and the fact that sort of unlike KeySend, it's all of this would be based on technology that's sort of ascending, because not only do you have the Nostr network effect, but like you mentioned, Strike, which is an extremely fast-growing application, and there's several others too that support it already. Primal also is becoming more and more of just a go-to Lightning wallet for folks that just works out of the box, and so there's a lot we could tap into and sort of ride that wave there.
Yeah, and I think the other thing as well is, and I know like your audience is very technical, Chris, but like anyone who has just a tiny little bit of technical experience, just go and like open up a WebSocket client and just connect to a relay and start playing around, because I think once you have that experience where you see, oh wait, all of the data in Primal is just available to me if I want it. I can query it, I can export it, I could set up my own relay. It just kind of makes you realize how powerful this is when you compare it to something like the Twitter or Facebook or TikTok world, where everything is just behind a closed wall and you can't get access to it. You don't really know what's going on.
Right. It's actually could very, very easily see me wanting to run my own relay in the future if this was a system. And again, it comes back to, I do kind of like to self-host a lot of this, not all of it, but
so
most of it.
So you could absolutely, and we've built our own relay at Fountain because we have kind of like an additional layer of feed building for specific mediums. So we have like podcast only feeds and music only feeds in the app. So we've built our relay from scratch twice, once again with the 1.3 release. And it's is totally possible to go and build your own relay. And if the scope of what you're building is narrow, like let's say you only cared about Nostr events that have these podcast tags in them, then the data set is not going to be that large either. So you can run it on a very cheap server. You can, not have to worry about scaling or anything like that. So it's very enjoyable to go out there and build a very simple relay. It doesn't, and there's great open source like starter projects for relays as well. Like there's the Stir Fry relay. There's just a bunch of different projects that let you get started.
Well, this really could be another one of those perfect timing moments because the Nostr network is built out, the Zap spec is well understood, clients are supporting it, and Podcasting 2.0 does need a solution to replace the Keysend-based boosts because right now, like you said, we're just limited to a handful of clients, and it sort of means less people can participate. So hopefully we see this get resolved. Of course, I'm sure I'll be trying out whatever comes along, so the audience will stay tuned for the ride with me. I wanted to chat about something that I don't think I've ever heard you speak to before. And so I've thought about long-term here at Jupiter Broadcasting. I think we'll probably try to use our Bitcoin not as like a treasury, but as kind of a strategic reserve in a sense where if there's a really bad year or if there's a crazy project that we want to try that there's, a hard way to fund, I view it as people that are supporting the shows today are giving the network future runway and flexibility down the road. And I'm curious if you've had any thoughts around how Fountain might have, if there will be a Bitcoin strategy, if there already is talks of a Bitcoin strategy where Fountain may accumulate some Bitcoin for, your balance sheet over time.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that one of our goals is to, have revenue in Bitcoin because we think that it just puts us in a really strong position for the future. So we want our revenue to be in Bitcoin. And that's why with all of the payments features, other than the app subscription to placate Apple and Google, we have the option to pay in Bitcoin and we take our very small fee in Bitcoin. I think whilst, I would love to have, a massive Bitcoin treasury for the company and, think about those kind of things. I don't really, to be honest, because the priorities for me are more immediate in terms of improving the listening experience within the app, helping podcasters and their audience understand Bitcoin and feel comfortable with it. And I just think that there's so much more work to do in particularly those two areas of UX and onboarding, that thinking about things like a long-term Bitcoin treasury for Fountain as a company just seems kind of like too far into the future.
Sure.
But yeah, I think the more that we can have our revenue in Bitcoin, the better. But ultimately, that's going to be, through our small transaction fees on the support payments. But yeah, it is interesting. I think as well, the other thing I would say is that I think the services like transcripts and things like there's a lot more interesting work we can do there in terms of, sending a micro payment to gain access to some kind of, transcript based feature. I think there's a lot there we can explore as well.
Right. I do think it's pretty neat too, the experimentation with supporting different payment methods for subscriptions and bonus episodes where you can subscribe with fiat or sats, and you can also do a one-off purchase with sats or fiat. That seems like because the root of what I'm trying to get at is like, what's the long-term kind of strategy for a company that is embracing Bitcoin, that is trying to onboard people to all these technologies, that doesn't involve like slapping a bunch of ads into the app? I mean, I know you have the premium membership, which I'm a member of, but I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are there. And it sounds like a bit of it might be some of the, small transaction fees, but do you think that's enough there with that and the memberships?
Yeah. So I'll just run through like the ways that Fountain makes money as a business. The first is our app premium subscription, and we're really appreciative to everyone that supports us through the app premium subscription. We wouldn't be where we are at today without that. So we're really grateful for it. I also know that the majority of the people that subscribe via the app premium subscription do so because they like what we're doing. Like what you get for that is lower transaction fees from 5% to 1%. But most people just do it because they like what we're doing. And we can definitely improve that in terms of making the premium subscription more valuable. Like we've got some great stuff coming down the line, which, should make the experience of using the app better. The other is, since we've moved into also offering a hosting product through our kind of merging with RSS Blue, that is a paid product. And we want to, offer great value to podcasters and have them make money. And so they can pay us for the product. I think that will be significant revenue for us going forward. And then finally, there's the transaction fees on the support payments. So whether you are sending a boost, streaming sats every minute, supporting a podcaster through the monthly subscription that they set up, or just purchasing a one-off bonus episode, Fountain takes a small fee on that. But over time, we think that can be massive, because if you look at something like Patreon, it's a massive business and it helps podcasters make, a massive amount of money. I think the issue with Patreon is that it's closed off. So the biggest example I've always thought about is if you subscribe to a private feed on Patreon or one of the other services that does similar things, and then you can't share it. So you might have listened to, like, the example I always give is Dan Carlin, right? I love Dan Carlin, some of the best history episodes I've ever listened to, but there's no way for me to share those episodes with people because they're behind a paywall and they're also behind a terrible kind of UX flow with a really old sign-up process, private feed. It's just a terrible experience. I think what we can do and what we want to do is to recreate the kind of frictionless payment experience of Patreon, but do it in a way where it's open and it's not hidden. So you can still share the episode, you can still comment on the episode, you can still, send a one-off payment to the episode. You can see what people in your follower graph are saying about that episode. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And then back to your original question about Bitcoin, we know that the journey of moving the world of payments on the internet to Bitcoin and the Lightning Network is not easy. It's not easy to onboard people to this technology because it's intimidating. There's a lot of fear about Bitcoin being a scam and all of these things that like headlines have told people. And so that's the reason that with the new subscription and one-time purchase features, we've added the ability to use Stripe, so that when we're talking to podcasters, when we're talking to people about the payment experience, we can say, hey, this is exactly like Patreon. You can pay with Apple Pay. You can pay with a bank card. Don't worry, it's totally fine. But then I think the way that we transition people to Bitcoin is the fees, because currently the fees on the bank card payments are much higher. So it's about 8% in total, whereas the fees on Lightning payments are only 2%. So, if we can build up trust with podcasters that are not so familiar with Bitcoin and then say to them, hey, you're using this product, it's working for you. Why don't you ask your audience to try the Bitcoin payments, because you'll have, 4x lower fees. And so ultimately, I think that's the way that we can slowly onboard people to Bitcoin and Lightning.
Yeah, and I think another key thing, and I know this is always something you're working on, but making it easier for new folks to acquire sats.
Yeah. This has been such a struggle because, this is something that we talked about, 3 years ago. It's been top of our priority list for so long, but it's really frustrating that it's out of our control, because in order to do it in a compliant way, we have to have the right licenses. So we're working really closely with Zebedee, who power all of our payments infrastructure, and we should have something to kind of share and showcase on that very soon, because right now it's too difficult. We used to have an integration with MoonPay so that you could buy sats in the app, but the user experience was so bad that we actually felt it was kind of putting people off a bit. But we should have some news on that soon.
Okay.
But that is a real difficulty.
Yeah. One of the ways that, not to circle back again, but if they're on Nostr and people are getting zapped for their content, or they're on Fountain and they're earning sats listening to podcasts, they can just turn around and boost that. And I hear from people that do that. Every week I'll get somebody that sent in their sats that they earned on Fountain or they got zapped on Nostr. So it's a way for people to get started without even having to connect to, a bank account and a sat source. So there's something there to that too, embracing that ecosystem for that reason.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot more that can be done in that area as well. I think, that we want to do a lot more with the like earnings and reward features within Fountain, but we kind of paused all of that because we just wanted to focus 100% on the listener experience, the UX of the library, the UX of the player, the native features like CarPlay, all of the things that make the listening experience better. So once we still have more to do, but once all of that feels at a really solid place, then we can relook at some of those features that make it more easy and fun for someone that's new to, acquire their first Bitcoin for free by winning something or, participating, things like that.
The buzz that would generate. Well, 1.3 is a great release. I had been biting my tongue because I've been on the beta and I kind of knew what was coming and I knew what my favorite features were, but it's really great to see just the steady level of improvements coming. So if people haven't checked out Fountain for a while, go to fountain.fm and get the latest version because it's coming along really nice. Oscar, thanks for spending some time with me and going over all of this.
Yeah, thanks so much, Chris. Really enjoyed talking with you. And as always, really appreciate all of the support and the feedback that you give us. It's incredible. And also, so many of your audience as well who share really great feedback with us. We listen to everything. So yeah, great to catch up. I'll keep pushing hard on the metadata issue because I think if we can solve it and bring some of this interoperability that I've talked about, I think it's going to level up open podcasting and showcase the Lightning Network. But yeah, if anyone listening, has any feedback about the app or anything I've talked about today, please do reach out. My email's oscar@fountain.fm, or you can just tag me on Nostr or on Twitter, anything like that. Yeah, we really appreciate all the feedback because sometimes it's just, the tiniest things that, we're heads down every day. We don't notice about the way the app works or the design. So we really appreciate all that feedback.
You might get a little more luck on Nostr than X, I'm just saying. But thank you, sir. It's good to talk to you. I hope you enjoyed that chat with Oscar. He has a very sharp mind. I'm always impressed how he can hold the question, give a long explanation, and then come back to the original question and answer everything in there. We did get into the podcasting weeds a bit, but I feel like there's probably very few interviewers, not to boast, who could ask some of the questions I could. There are some, but not many. So I hope you found it insightful that we were able to get into some of that kind of stuff and the wider Bitcoin topics as well. Let me know how I did with the boost. Would you like to hear another one of these? Let me know, or maybe you wouldn't. You can also support the show by doing what you do. You can buy your sats on River, one of the best ways to stack sats in the US. You can support the show by using the link on our show notes. If you're all about self-custody, the Bitcoin Well, an amazing automatic self-custody Bitcoin platform in Canada and the United States. And if you've got some sats burning a hole in your pocket on the Lightning Network, the Bitcoin Company. Again, link in the notes. All they do is Bitcoin. You go from Lightning to gift card in seconds. You can even log in with your Lightning. The Fold Card, one of our community's favorite ways to stack sats while they pay bills and all the other day-to-day stuff. Fold Card. And of course, Salt Lending. Now with margin call protection, which I'm going to be looking into. Tell you what, Salt Lending lets you access the value of your Bitcoin without having to sell it. And a great UI to manage everything. You can make payments with ACH or your stable coins if you want. So all links are in the show notes. You can support the show by using one of those, just doing what you do. And of course, I will see you next time. You can go to thisweekinbitcoin.show for the links this week and everything I talked about. Again, that's thisweekinbitcoin.show. And while you're over there, you can always check out the other Jupiter Broadcasting shows. You never know. If you like self-hosted topics and open source, go check out Linux Unplugged. And if you want to see the wild side, go check out The Launch. Thanks for being here on This Week in Bitcoin, and I'll see you next time.